Very much. It's good. It's nice to be in Montpellier for the first time, and I didn't know what to expect. When I arrived, this is a beautiful country, it's a beautiful city. Looking at the trees and the air is nice. I'm here to present key challenges in pesticide use. I was asked to look at tropical countries, but I thought Tanzania was in the topic, so if I share experiences from Tanzania, that will do. Who am I? I'm talking to you. Like, my friends call me Vera. I have a very complicated name, which is, if I pronounce it properly, Vera Scie. So many people don't want to use it. I work for Muhimbili, University of Health and Allied Sciences. I'm working part-time because I'm retired, but I still teach. I'm working full-time. I was formerly at the Tropical Pesticide Research Institute. I worked at this institute for more than 30 years before I joined Muhimbili. And I studied all over the world. I've last in Tampere, Finland. I was there for almost 3-4 years. And I studied in UK, University of Manchester, for my master's in occupational health sciences. So you can understand my interest in occupational and environmental health. Specifically, I like to look at the impact of pesticides and other chemicals on non-target organisms. First, when I was asked to present about challenges on pesticides, I couldn't figure out whose challenges am I talking to. Is it the end users? Is it the politicians? I think when you talk of challenges of pesticides, this is a very subjective topic. And I was talking to some of my colleagues. Some of them will say, well, the challenge is we are not getting enough pesticides, or the challenges is that we have pests that are not responding to pesticides. The farmers themselves, they have their own challenges when it comes to pesticides. So I chose to come up with sharing my experience in the field so that at least all of us can decide what is the challenge. But what I wanted you to know to start with is that Tanzania, we don't manufacture pesticides. We import pesticides from either Europe or from China, from all over. And we have them ready to use, or we have some factories that have been imported into our country that bring in active ingredients and formulate the pesticide from within the country. The country has decided to come up with regulation, and these regulations were initiated a long time ago, but within Tanzania, it is the first law to regulate pesticide came up in 1979 under the Tropical Pesticide Research Institute Act. We had Part 5 in this law that was pesticide registration and control. But things have changed since 1997. There's some people who were not comfortable in talking about the word pesticide. They advised the government to change the law and come up with plant protection substances. And then now we are back to another law that has come up in 2020 that is talking about plant health. They don't want to hear pesticide. But pesticides are hidden inside this, so we can see the changes and we can know where we are going when it comes to pesticide use. But unfortunately, we regulate importation, we regulate manufacture, distribution, but we don't regulate use. Use is not regulated within the law. So people are just using pesticides as they wish. So I chose very few main points. I'll give a short background about Tanzania and the situation. And then I'll give you a lot of information about unsafe practices, which is where we think of the challenges when it comes to the need to reduce use of pesticides is because of what we see. And then a little bit about the impact which has been covered by INSEM. They've covered a lot of this. So a short background about Tanzania. Tanzania, we have the map on the right, which is an agroecological map. It shows a lot of diversity to come to the ecology, and that reflects the different types of crops that are grown in Tanzania, which has a common theme of pesticide use. There are different crops in the highlands. The green part is, we have highlands. I don't know how to use the pointer. The green is highlands. We have northern highlands. We have southern highlands. We have the arid areas, like the red one is arid. We have other semi-arid and all these. They have different types of crops, but most of these crops, they are sprayed pesticides. And then we normally carry out agricultural surveys, and the latest one was done in 2019-20, which has shown that many people are moving towards crop production. About 33% of families, households, they've started crop production. And we have those who are doing crop production and livestock keeping, and those who are doing purely livestock, and we have pastoralists, those who move from one area to the other. But these ones, 33% is crop production. We're going to see later why people are going to agriculture. And for pesticides in my country, they are seen as essential for economic development, not only by the users, even the government itself. And there's high potential for exposure to pesticides in communities looking at the way people handle pesticides. And when you ask, we do surveys to find out whether people have ever been poisoned in their lifetime. About 95% of people say that they have been poisoned. But many of these poisoning, they end up within the families. They don't go to hospitals. Very few are reported. And even those which are reported, if you go into medical records, it will be very difficult to get them. So we have a problem with pesticides. And pesticides are used by young farmers. I'm saying young because in the agricultural survey, I was surprised to see that they even have a classification of where they say farmers below 15, making about 20% of the farmers. So imagine a child, 15 years, is called a farmer. This is the kind of population that we have. People between 15 and 60, those are the majority in farmers. And they do this in condition of ignorance and poverty because they don't know much about pesticides and they want to make ends meet. What draws people to farming? Some is because of subsistence. They want to survive. They need food. They need other things from the agriculture, so they go into farming. Others, they are lured in by markets. The market for traditional crops, which we are going to see, and the new crops that have come up. The government is encouraging foreign investment, so we have a lot of interest in our country. The country is very big and it is arable. They come in and they start farming. Some of them, they even contract farmers. You know, you have contract farming where they give them all the inputs and everything, and then they buy the products from them. And with these ones, many of them, they will export whatever produce they have they export to maybe Europe and all this, where at least they prescribe what should be applied because of the restrictions in residues, but what is grown for local consumption does not have restriction. The government also supports farming, so that's why many people are going into farming. So we have policies, agricultural policies in Tanzania that are encouraging the use of pesticides, because I was looking at the National Agricultural Policy and saw what they come up with as a challenge in low productivity. They say that use of pesticides and other input is very low, so that they consider that as a challenge. So they are laying strategies to come out of this challenge. There's a lot of increasing mechanization. There was a time they came up with a scheme that was buying a lot of power tillers and distributing them to farmers because these are small tractors that can either they can afford or they loan to them and then they pay slowly. So this is the policy. When you look at the crops that use a lot of pesticides, we have the traditional crops, especially cotton and some of this coffee and cashew. Tea also uses pesticides and Scie. But we have newcomers, new crops that have come on the market since late 1990s, which are the heaviest consumer of pesticides these days, especially horticultural crops. We have vegetables, fruits, flowers. And then when you look at the contribution of horticulture to exports, since 2015 it is going very high. So there is a lot of interest. And some of these, like flowers, nobody tests for residues in flowers, so they apply all sorts of pesticides on flowers. Or at least on fruits and vegetables, there is the control. These are some of the, what brings in many of the foreign investment. There was a lot talk of biofuels. At least they were using a plant like Jatropha, which is not so harmful, but when they go into using maize and other food crops for biofuels, it means they are going to endanger the life of the people because they will sell their crop to where they get more money, and this might end up causing food insecurity in the long run. Before we look at the unsafe practices, I just thought we should remind ourselves what it's called safe practice, and this is dictated by the pesticide dealer industry itself. What they say is responsible use of pesticides is that you should only use pesticide when you need it, which means maybe they're encouraging farmers to do scouting first and see whether they have pests load that is necessary to spray. And they encourage people to read the product label and leaflets so that at least they can follow instructions that are given on the labels. And they tell you to take empty, rinsed containers to the nearest approved collection site. And while you are spraying pesticides, you should always wear protection. You should have protective equipment, and you should make sure that your equipment, the equipment that you're using is calibrated properly and it does not leak. And then you should not pollute the environment by misusing pesticides or leaving empty containers in the field. So if you are able to adhere to all this, then you're okay. So for them, they have removed their responsibility of anything happening to you, shifted it from themselves, shifting it to you. So, can we use pesticides safely in our country, in Tanzania? Pesticides in Tanzania are available everywhere. On the streets, if you like on the left. There are even people moving with bikes, and they have, carriage that they are selling. They have making a lot of noises. This is Tanzania. And then you have shops at marketplaces, because that is where people go shopping. So people are going to sell food crops, they are going to sell vegetables, they are going to sell, and then they buy pesticides from the same place. So you have shops like here, this one is a food shop and this one is a pesticide shop. But then even within the shop, the pesticide shop, they also sell food and other items. These are some of my concerns. They are major concerns. We rely on the manufacturers or people who know what is the problem with pesticides for advice and instructions. So we have some of these conventions, like the Rotterdam Convention and the POPs Convention, that we have ratified. And some of these, we have even incorporated them into our laws. But still, when it comes to implementation of these laws, they are not implemented. They are not implemented the way they should be implemented. We have very weak regulations in Tanzania. Like I said before, we had a comprehensive pesticide law, but later on they decided to fragment it, come with plant protection substances, which means pesticides that are used on public health, they are not regulated. And nobody questions this. And this is something which the industry is very happy about it, because when you don't know what to do with controlling pesticides, for them they are happy. And then the chemical dependence. People are dependent on chemicals these days. They are so used to using pesticides to the extent that you go to a farmer, you ask them, what can we do to help you not to use pesticides? They say, it's impossible. I cannot farm without pesticide. So it is to that extent. And even in household, people are so used to pesticide to an extent that I remember one time I went to sleep over in my cousin's house, and we were sleeping on the same bed. We have a mosquito net, and then there was a mosquito inside the net. So she just said, oh, let me bring aerosol. She wants to bring a aerosol to kill that mosquito thing. Then I said, why don't you just do this and kill the mosquito? So we are that dependent on pesticide. And then we import, like other presenters have said, we import hazardous pesticides that are no longer used in the countries of origin. And we have been doing this despite the fact that we have the prior informed consent that warns us that these pesticides have this, then these problems, that's why you shouldn't be using them. We have a case like where our governments wanted to reintroduce DDT for mosquito control. And you wonder why. They know that DDT has been banned for many years and it is not even used anywhere, but they feel that, no, we need it. For what reason, I don't know. Perception of risk, which I think is very low for all levels, from the end users to the policymakers. The way they perceive pesticide as risk is really something that we wonder how. And even the measures that are advocated for preventing harmful effects, they are also very questionable, because they've produced, like on pesticide labels, they say that some people in Africa, in developing countries, they don't know how to read and write, but then we put in symbols that they're going to look at the symbols and understand that they are supposed to wear maybe boots or gloves, or they are not supposed to pollute wells or all this. But nobody can understand those labels. People don't understand the symbols. The people don't understand what is written on the labels. And in the government, in my country, they even say they should have labels that have both Swahili and English, but still people don't read. So these are major concerns. I'll carry you now through the unsafe practices that we have, and we'll start with storage. Storage of pesticide at household level, at farm level, is where exposure comes, because we've done a lot of, most of this, what I'm going to present is coming from studies that we did in the farms. So you go into the farm and look at the way they store pesticides. For them, they're storing the pesticides to protect them from disappearing, from being stolen, not to protect them from maybe reach for children or something like this. No, they are protecting them from being stolen. So they put them under the bed, in their bedrooms. They will put them, in the attic, where even if there is a leakage and you sleep under this area, you get dripped of pesticide. And they put them in the same stores with protective equipment, with application equipment. They don't separate them. When we look at of course the picture is not so clear. On the right at the top, those are the pesticides in that bag and the protective equipment on the right side. Underneath, you see the cooking pots. There's a stack of maize that have been harvested, and the other one has even been shelled. Then on the right is the some of the areas where they pour pesticides before they take them out to the field. So this is the situation in the farms when it comes to storage. And some of these stores, they are not actually stores as such, but everybody can access, even animals can access the stores. That's why you have like this one, those are pesticide containers hidden within the wrap of bags, maize bags and all these kind of things. And this one is a platform they've put up there, and they put the pesticides on top of the platform where even children can climb and take the pesticide from there. So storage is a very big risk. In the shops, there's a problem when it comes to retailing, pesticide retailing. They come with containers, like 1 liter or above, which people cannot afford to buy that much. The law requires the registrar to order the manufacturers to produce in quantities that people can buy. So if people need 20 cc's, maybe the manufacturer is supposed to supply 20 cc containers and all this. But the dealers, the retailers in our country, they don't like that kind of system, because when they decant, they make more money, because who comes and looks at the volume that we are measuring for the pesticide, so they get more money. But the risk is very high, because they can open a container, a bottle of pesticide maybe, and pour out 200 or 20 cc's, and then keep that bottle maybe for a month or two or so. Sometimes these pesticide, they lose their efficacy. And this one, when the farmer comes and buys, that is where they start throwing them out in the field because they are not working. And then they remain with empty containers. These empty containers, it's very difficult to deal with them because they end up selling them. Farmers, they have attitudes where they spray different types of pesticide. They spray mixtures, and they can even mix the same active ingredient in one mix, because the pests have developed resistance and they don't respond to this, so they are advised to apply more. They increase the frequency of spray sometimes, and they don't even respect the harvest period or re-entry period. So like when they're growing tomatoes, they're harvesting at the same time the tomato fruits are still coming out. If there are pests within these tomatoes, they will spray them, and on the same day they'll harvest and send the tomatoes to the market. So there's no respect. The mixing is done without following instructions, because like we're saying, many of the containers they don't have the right instructions, and they just mix the way they are advised maybe by other farmers. They don't protect themselves, and they go near the waterways where they mix because of ease of getting the water. Application is also very hazardous, because they are using sprayers that are leaking on their bags. They're not serviced, they're not calibrated, like they're saying. They have no protection, they walk barefoot in the field, and even when the nozzles are blocked, they will just blow them up. They don't care whether they're exposing themselves. The empty containers, I've talked a lot about the empty containers, which are thrown out into the field, or they are reused for domestic use, for putting water, cooking oil. Sometimes if they dispose of, they burn them or they bury them without even cleaning them. We also have a problem of containers that remain after, like in our country, we have migratory pests, like we had locusts and we have birds, and the government takes responsibility to buy pesticides for these kind of pests. And sometimes they stock the pesticides, but we don't get outbreaks, which means they are left with pesticides which they need to dispose of. And when they distribute, they remain with empty containers, which at times they normally even sell to people so that people can reuse. We have a problem of obsolete pesticides, and I think we have the famous African stockpile program, which many people are aware of. But I wanted to highlight the problem of obsolete pesticide. We had an inventory in 1997 that said we had 1,000 tons of obsolete pesticides, and when the same people did the inventory in 2006, they found there was 700 tons. Where did the other tons go to? So that we have a tendency of obsolete pesticides appearing and disappearing, and we know where they disappear to everything. And these are only pesticides that were held in public stores. Those that are held by farmers, both large and small scale, nobody knows how much, and we know there is a lot, because the retailers, they have a lot of pesticides in stock which they cannot deal with. We have a lot of environmental contamination and poor hygiene. I won't go into detail. Like on the right, we see people, they've finished spraying and they're washing their protective equipment in a water stream that somebody else downstream is taking the water for cooking. The health risks, they've been covered by INSEM a lot, but we have a lot of problems with poisoning, especially the small amounts that we get, which lead us to having non-communicable diseases. And these are on the increase in Tanzania, but we have not done studies to see how much pesticides contribute to this one. So in summary, we can say that pesticides in Tanzania, they are seen as essential, that the people are encouraged to use pesticides despite their impact on health and the environment. So we need to encourage the use of country contexts, use context in risk assessment process, so that at least when we register pesticides, we know that people can use them in a responsible way, although I cannot say that we can use pesticides safely. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vera. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk, and a little bit scary as well on the status of pesticides in Tanzania. Thank you. Any question for Vera? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vera. Indeed, glooming picture you're depicting there from mostly, I believe, smallholder farmers in Tanzania. Much more shocking than what I could have expected there. My point is that as a firm believer of biopesticides, biotechnologies, I also firmly believe we have a lot to learn from Mother Africa. What can you tell us on certain varieties and plants that traditionally were used to fight pests on farms by grandmothers of current young farmers, grandmothers, and that those traditions have probably been abandoned for the sake of resorting to a cheap and quick chemical, easier to apply, requiring less preparation, less labor, etc., etc. And then on the other hand, the question goes more as food for thought for the research community, is as we think and talk about the potential for biopesticides to replace pesticides, how much are we looking into Africa as a solution provider for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question of biopesticide is something that is coming up now, even in Tanzania. There are people who are now pioneering to encourage people to go back to the roots, you know, and even people themselves, because of the increase in non-communicable diseases, they're starting to suspect pesticides having been the cause of the problems that are in the country. We have institutions like TPRI that had a section within them that was dedicated to, you know, developing these biopesticides. So they will go out into the villages to ask farmers what kind of plant, because there are many farmers in the country who are still using traditional methods. So they were supposed to do this kind of research. But like I said before, there are some powers that are more powerful than we can imagine that are discouraging this kind of thing. It is to me, it's important that we deal with the users rather than dealing with the policymakers, because it's easier to influence the users than to influence the policymakers. So biopesticides are coming back, and we hope with time we are going to be able to reduce the use of pesticides. And unfortunately for Tanzania, I would say we don't even use, we use very little compared to what is used in the north. But unfortunately, we are small-scale farmers. So the number of people who are exposed are more than when you have fewer farmers who are using mechanization and they are controlled by their government to see what they're using. And the consumers also, they influence what they use than what we have. In our country, everybody is exposed within a household. If you are living in a family that is doing farming, looking at how they store the pesticides and how they apply the pesticides. So it is unfortunate that our government cannot see this. They just say, oh, these pesticides are used, you know, in Europe you are just careless, you know, that's why you are getting affected. But now people are realizing it, so the agroecology, which is being encouraged, is going to help us very much, but effort has to go to the farmers.
Yes, thank you very much for your great presentation, and I must say that Tanzania is also a very beautiful country. I'm very sorry to hear about this, but this is not, it's known all over. My question is, public research is supposed to provide new knowledge in order to contribute to new public policies that are supposed to influence and to mainstream the country's techniques, also related to pesticides utilization. As you said, this is really not very efficient because the laws are not implemented, and well, the powers are maybe too powerful. What would be your recommendations in order to provide a research that would be efficient to the smallholders and to the farmers, and also to the people eating the food that is produced locally?
Thank you very much for that question about research, which is a topic that is close to my heart. I said I've been doing research for more than 40 years now on pesticides, trying to look at the impact of pesticides on humans and non-target organisms. Unfortunately, I've never received funding from the government to do this kind of research. The little that I've done, I got funding from international organizations. And even when you start doing this work, sometimes the forces, they can discourage you from doing it. I remember there was a time we were doing research in the farming community, you know, trying to find out how they use pesticides and what is their perception and what we can do to help them. We went into a village. Actually, we had an entomologist who was helping us identify the pests for them, you know, that tell them, go out into the field, collect whatever insect that you see and spray. And they brought the insect back, and then the entomologist said, this is not a pest, this is the only pest. Only 15% of what they spray was a pest. And then we had those who are helping with the equipment. We were a multidisciplinary task force. This village uses a lot of pesticides, so we were trying to find out whether we can discourage their use. We taught them for 1 week. At the end of our, intervention, they were throwing away pesticides. They didn't want to have anything to do with the pesticides. But then a month later, they contacted us and said, we have these people from the ministry who have come. They want to teach us on judicious use of pesticides. They came with, pesticide stewardship. So they went to the same farmers and they are trying to teach them that they can use pesticides safely. Then we ask ourselves, Ministry of Agriculture, the country is so big. Why didn't they go and teach other farmers? Because they knew that we went there as a government institution. They knew that we've been there before. Why did they go to the same farmers? It's because when we went there, farmers decided they don't want to have anything to do with pesticide anymore. So the industry funds the government to go back to the same place and tell the farmers that you can use these pesticides very safely. So that is in short to answer your question is we need support from outside the government because working with government is not easy and you cannot get funding from the government to discourage people to use pesticides. So now we are lucky. When we started, we were very few who were looking at the impact. But now we even have the Tanzania organization, you know, organic agriculture organization movement, which is encouraging the agroecology. So the more we are, the better, and we cannot rely on the local resources. That's why when I was invited to come to this kind of conference, I just saw it as an opportunity for us to have people we can work together to reach out to the farmers are very receptive, you know, so, and they understand if you give them the right information and give them alternative. Because when we were telling them, don't use pesticides, they said, give us alternative, what can we use? So if we have these alternatives, it's very easy to convince them to stop to use pesticides. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vera, for coming. It's an honor to have you here. I've been working with Vera for a couple of years now. I just wanted to say two things. One is that I really encourage you. Vera is a very modest person, so she didn't put all her publications. She was just telling you a story here, but Vera is one of the very few people who has published extensively on these issues in Tanzania over the last decades. So really go and see what she has published. Everything she said is not just an anecdote. She has published papers on this in high-quality journals, and I really encourage you to go and discover her work. So thank you for this. And the second point I wanted to mention is, to me, what this draws me to is often we frame the question as being, how come if we give farmers information, they will not act upon that information? And so this is often the way we frame things, but why don't we frame it differently? How come these pictures and the way, the challenges of pesticide use, this is not specific to Tanzania. You go to Burkina Faso, it's the same thing. In most, not only in Africa, but you have the same challenges. So how come, knowing that this is the way pesticides are being used in many countries in the world, we don't integrate that into the way we perceive the challenges of pesticide use and regulation in these countries? And to me, this is like, we should shift it around in a certain way. But that's just my comment, but maybe you want to react upon that, I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you.
One short question and one short answer. Last short question. Indeed, short answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for your nice presentation. You told that most of farmers are young or very young. Do you see it like as an opportunity to make change easier? To say maybe because the young people is more receptive to the change and to implement agroecological transition?
Yeah, I think working with young people, it's easier to, at least because to me, our parents, they never went to school. They are old people, so once they stick to something, it's very difficult to change them. But the young generation nowadays, they are inquisitive. They will even read, they will even go to the internet and search and all this. So, like you say, it's an opportunity for us to give them the correct way of growing crops without endangering their own lives and the lives of others. And when you look at the way they grow, even what he's saying, people know that pesticides are harmful, but they still continue using them. And you go to the farms, like what I showed you, when they grow, they have their own plots on the side, which they don't spray. They only spray what they are sending to the market. And it's because the government does not do residue research to see and inform the consumers that what you are eating has a lot of poison. It's the farmers, they know they have put in a lot of pesticides, they grow their own, they don't spray them. So we ask them, don't you ever go out and eat in a restaurant or somewhere? You are eating the same tomatoes that you spray. They say, oh, so that is it. You have children in school, in boarding school. They buy tomatoes from the market, which you are poisoning them. They say, oh, so this is the case. So when you give them this information, at least I can see the young farmers will change more easily than the older generation. So it's an opportunity, like you're saying, yes. And we could even start in schools. We have schools, they have like environment clubs. We can go into these clubs and tell them that this is how they are supposed to be looking at pests and controlling the pests. So it's an opportunity, like you say.